thing on.
Looks like we're live.
Just looking for one thing real quick here.
Okay.
There we go. Cool. Looks like I'm live. Just looking for one thing quick here. All right. Yeah, I fixed that. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another monthly live stream. I'm Theo McManigal here with James Walther. We are the Apostolate for Marital Intimacy. And James, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
No, doing pretty good. I see you're and you're in the hammock there this time.
Yeah, a little hammock chair out on the deck. It's gorgeous weather here in St. Louis, Missouri, and I did not want to be stuck in my office today. So, I figured we could have a conversation out here just as easily as there.
That's cool with me, and I wish I totally didn't realize that or get the cigar memo. One of these days, we'll jointly smoke one.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, cool. Well, and I know we skipped last month. Is there anything going on with the apostolate that's you find worth sharing at this juncture before we kind of jump in?
Well, I mean, we're really just trucking along right now. Um, we were mentioning an article. I forget the name. Let's see. It's refinelife.com or .co. I don't really know much about them, but Grace Porto published an article about us on Friday. Well, not about us, but about Catholic resources for engaged newlywed couples, and put us at the top of the list, which was kind of cool. Other than that, we're keeping plenty busy with lots of coaching clients, lots of inquiries, direct messages on the Patreon, and email inquiries. So definitely a lot going on. Most of it's behind the scenes, but plenty to keep us busy.
Fantastic. Yeah, for sure. It's all good stuff. Well, so we're changing up our live stream just a little bit. So just to tell everyone what's going on here, I mean, most of you are probably viewing this after the fact. For a while, the focus of our live streams was to kind of answer questions and really try to get donors. Oh, that's something worth hitting on. But first of all, please donate still. We would like that. We do need it. We continue to run on donations. There's a caveat to that I'll let you speak to in a second. And the question box is still open at this time, but we're not committing to answering every question. If it makes sense to answer a question, fine. If not, we'll just either ignore it or we can chat in the comments later on. But not that we're the kind to avoid questions. Just we want to make sure we're having conversations that I think are relevant. We want to make sure that our titles of these videos and live streams that come up are something that people can find readily when they're searching for various things. So we're just going to make sure to keep these both educational as well as, just have some good conversations. But I really want to, in a way, hit it hard that we're touching on some good topics, and have that reflected in ways that people can easily find. So there is one caveat to the donation. It's not a caveat really, but we've become more active on our Patreon. And we'd love to have you support us there too, whether you want to donate to us or support us on Patreon. You want to talk a little bit about that as an update that we've made?
Sure. So we've realized that there's a lot of good. Um,
There's a
so
little
we
bit of a
not
cutoff
everyone wants
there.
to get an email about every article we post. So I was saying that we are putting out a lot of new content, some stuff almost daily, but we realize that most people don't want to be email every day about content. So we started putting more on the Patreon where people get a notification if we publish new content, but not another email to fill their inbox. And responded well to that. So we started, really pushing on. It also gives people another way to support us with the membership tiers on there. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll continue to keep posted about that, but we're very excited about the fact that we've got started on Patreon, and that's not exactly new. It's just that we're going to be investing a little more content and different
Mhm.
things on the Patreon.
Yep.
So, but without, we're still going to maintain our social presences and our website and all of that. It's just we have a Patreon too.
Mhm.
So good. Well, one of the things I want to so today what I want to talk about is um, I would just like to we exist to help married couples, and today I just want to make a case for marriage. There's actually a lot of people and a lot of different movements that are just downgrading marriage and
Mhm.
or denigrating it in various ways. A lot of it comes from woundedness, but you just have high percent. I mean, and some of it has come from things I've seen online. Others, I mean, there were conversations I had recently. I mean, when I was doing an episode of the Covenant Eyes podcast with the Catholic gentlemen, and some of them were talking about some giving some pretty high percentages. I don't have them offhand of men who just won't even approach a woman anymore to try
Mhm.
dating, to um
Yep.
to ask her out. They don't want to be labeled as a perv or get
Yep.
have a complaint made about them. Or you got these
Mhm.
guys in the red pill who they're advertising Andrew Tate as a way of life, which and he discourages monogamy. Or you're talking about
Yep.
just guys who they want to frame women as terrible, and usually it comes from some
Mhm.
bad experience they had or divorce, or they just want to frame marriage as like, don't do it or else you're going to not see your kids anymore and get dragged through divorce court
Mhm.
and all that stuff. And this
Right.
is serious. Like, I mean, these and not, this is not, we're just talking about people who aren't even married or are divorced, right? Not to mention there's very high divorce rates happening.
Mhm.
I mean, I know they throw around like
Yep.
50% of marriages end in divorce. I don't even know if that's true. You might have some better stats on that, but the fact of the matter is divorce is a big problem. Um, but it still stands that God made marriage, and He's called most of us to it.
Mhm.
And those who He has not called to marriage, who's He's called to celibacy or a generous single life, it's not because marriage is bad. It's because marriage is good that it's worth
Mhm.
giving up. And still, marriage still has something to do with how each and every one of us is made. It's the analogy God chose for how to relate with his people in the Old Testament. It's the analogy God chose for how he incarnate as Jesus Christ would relate with his church. We're all made for it with him, and biologically, with a member of the opposite sex, even if we choose to give it up for the sake of the kingdom of heaven and beginning that life now in the life of celibacy. So the point is, this is a big problem. And James, can you share some of what you maybe come across in this regard? Have you caught on to some of these trends? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So I have definitely been tracking these trends and a lot of this movement online with the red pill, with the incel or whatever label we want to put on them movements. Um, Especially the overall trend that we are seeing of men not wanting to date, not approaching women, uh, um, being, if they date, they're very selective about who they date. A lot of the negativity going on online um, about uh, about marriage and about like divorce court. And you might be surprised to hear, but I agree with most of them. Okay? Most of what they're saying about, you know, dating, the average woman will lead to a miserable life. Let's be quite blunt about that. The average American woman has been raised in a cesspool of feminism. And which is inherently opposed to the Catholic faith and to married life. Okay. And women who have soaked up that, now most women have been exposed to that, and whether they realize or not, they have some element of that. But the ones who really, know, just made that their whole personality and lifestyle, absolutely stay away from them like the Black Death. Absolutely, young men are wise to treat them as serpents, to not approach them, not speak to them. Because in the modern day and age, the difference between somebody, between flirting and sexual assault is simply whether or not the person on the receiving end thinks that person's cute. Like, that's the difference, And I know people will lose their minds at me saying that, but I have to sit through all the stinking hours of courses every year about the difference. And it's like, no, let's be real. All these things that you're saying to not do, if somebody wants to be on the receiving end, they're more than happy to receive it. And we live in a society of double standard where women can go up and touch and talk to men entirely inappropriately, and they just assume that they'll be okay with that. So a lot of young men have, rightfully so, been disillusioned. The Me Too movement and the man versus bear movements, really have awoken young men to realize that the average American woman is not someone that they need to spend their time and effort on. She is a waste of their time. She will drag them down. She will not bring them to happiness, because if they do commit to her long term, have children with her, then, like you said, divorce rates are high. Okay. Part of the reason why they're high is because they are financially advantageous for the woman. She takes the children and takes his money. Divorce courts do strongly lean in favor of the woman. Um, Divorce courts also have a stake in the game because they get a percentage of whatever he pays in child support. So of course they're going to rack up his bill and make him pay as much as they can, and they don't actually care about the children. I mean, there's cases upon cases of all the abuse, and you can go online and find all sorts of it. The problem is that so many men have realized this, have realized that if they don't want to spend, 20 some odd years of their life fighting to see their kids, then they have to be very careful about who they marry. And they're 1,000% correct that, much better to not marry than to marry a woman who is going to make you miserable. With that, I agree with them, 1,000%. When couples come to me, if they have, they can have all sorts of sexual dysfunction, but if they have a peaceful, happy marriage, we can work with them all day long and get fantastic success. But if they have strong differences in values and morals, it is going to be a much harder road. And that's what we're seeing right now with the difference between these young men and women, and these women that have embraced that feminism, these young men who are realizing that they don't have to tolerate it. Realize that feminism only exists because men have tolerated it. Let's be very blunt about this. Mankind could eliminate feminism tomorrow. Just simply say no. As much as feminists hate to hear it, men are the determining factor on all this. Why? Because unfortunately, whether might makes right or not, the reality is might can control things. And men control the infrastructure, control the vehicles of power. Like the 19th Amendment could end tomorrow if enough men decided it was so. And that's what, unfortunately, we are starting to realize, is that these young men who have been treated like garbage for years, who've been talked down to, who've been, falsely accused of things, they've lost their patience. And when you have voices online like Andrew Tate and was Nick Shirley, not Nick Shirley, he does other stuff. Anyway, there's plenty of different, creators online who show up as masculine, as virile, as able to disregard what these women have to say online, and sort of being giving a rallying cry to these young men to be virile, to be virtuous, and to throw off this falsehood of feminism. These young men are being drawn to them. And unfortunately, along with that sort of zeal and fire masculinity, they're also sucking up this poison of not just rejecting marriage to, faithless women, but rejecting marriage entirely. And that is going to have grave consequences for society. So,
Was that Nick Fuentes that you were
yes,
trying to
that's what I
name
was
before?
thinking of. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Yep. Yep.
So, you know, I think that's what makes the worldview by Andrew Tate, Nick Fuentes, some of these guys, that's what makes it attractive is not really the word I want to use, but that's what makes it something that that is gaining traction, is the fact that there is an accurate
Mhm.
diagnosis, or at least for the most part, of the problem. I'm stealing some terms from Matt Walsh when he's talked about Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, let's just
Mhm.
stick with him for a second. He accurately diagnoses a number of the problems, but he's giving the wrong
Mhm.
medication, so to speak. Um,
Right.
because the fact of the matter is still remains that masculinity, femininity, and marriage all are made by God and are inherently good, right?
Mhm.
But when enough of these things go wrong, and when masculinity, men, you get put down enough, and have all these things
Mhm.
happen, like, yes, you just get sick and tired. I don't know if you've seen Step Brothers, but the line that no, Dale, yeah, John C. Riley, kind of toward the end, when you oppress people, you rise up in a fiery anger. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but if you haven't, then it's not going
It's
to make
been a
much
long
sense.
time, but yeah.
But he does, but he says that, and there's a point to that, right? Like when you're oppressed, eventually you're going to get upset about it and either fight back or at least opt out of the whole thing. So
Well,
you know we have the problem before us, but as promoters of
yeah.
marriage, we know that the answer is not, well, just give up, don't get married, don't have kids. I mean, there is a better to not marry than marry the wrong woman. Certainly we find that in scripture, and not just from the apostles saying to Jesus, oh well, if you can't divorce your wife, it's better not to marry. But I think there's even a part somewhere in the Old Testament that says something along the lines of, you're going to be miserable if you pick the wrong woman. And I'm using entirely the wrong words, but it's the right concept. I'll have to look that
Mhm.
up here.
I want to say it's in Proverbs. I want to say there's actually multiple verses that talk about that in Proverbs and Sirach. Ecclesiastes probably as well. But I'm quite certain it talks about that in the wisdom books. So,
um,
the-
Yeah, you're right. There's plenty of places throughout Proverbs. It would be too much for me to look up right now, but um,
well, Proverbs is the
no.
book that praises the good wife the
Well,
most of
yes,
any other
yes,
book in
it
the
does
Old
both, right?
Testament.
It praises the good wife, but I don't. Let's not make any mistake, right? One of the things that kind of sticks out with me, though, actually, you kind of said it, right? We have feminism, and it's a big problem, but it's somewhere along the way, men were involved in all of this coming about. And I
Yep.
also, what kind of resonates with me too is, sometimes you get these, if you spend enough time on Twitter or wherever, you hear these stories of like, oh well, this girl, cheated on her boyfriend, or this woman cheated on her husband or whatever. And then some of
Mhm.
the red pill people will be like, see, like they'll give this, here's an example, and then they'll do inductive reasoning, right? All women are terrible or whatever. But she ran off with a man, right? So, you
Hmm.
know, like there's evil on both
Yeah.
sides. There's good on both sides.
Right.
Um,
Well, also the reality of hypergamy, which you really haven't heard much about until literally the last few months,
Yeah.
where that started to be a conversation online of you know people have been poo-pooing on monogamy for years, and of course, feminists are more than happy to complain about polygamy. Um, you know, many men having many wives because they're saying, well, that's degrading to women, but they have no problem with hypergamy, where you know all the women are having intercourse with the top whatever 10% of men. You know, where there's this insane idea of standards on social media now, where you hear women saying, well, they can only date a guy who's 6 foot tall and makes 100,000 a year and has all these different, very superfluous criteria. And it's like there are guys that exist like that. And the guys that exist like that, either they're ignoring women because they are choosing to be successful and ignoring women allows them to do that, or they have daddy's money and they're able to sleep with as many women as they want effectively because they meet those arbitrary criteria. Um, but,
So what's the answer? So what would you what's the answer here? I mean, we cannot contribute to the hopelessness part. Oh, I want to add one other thing. Because this is kind of a denigration of marriage too.
mhm,
Um, my wife and I recently watched the series on Netflix called Blue Therapy. I don't know if you haven't watched it. If you have Netflix, I recommend it
mhm,
actually. It's a bunch of couples who sit in marriage counseling, but you do see some couples in there who they've just been together for so long, but they're not married to each other.
mhm.
And you don't need that show to know that this is a reality, right? And by the way,
Yeah.
that was one of the things that with this whole kissing conversation came up online or whatever, which like whatever, I don't, uh, the one thing I felt the most convicted to contribute was simply the dating period of your life doesn't have to last very long. You find the right people, you keep a clear head about you, you get serious about deciding, like, is this the person for me? Are we the people for each other? You put your faith first, you have the right conversations, you go
Yeah.
about things prudently. You could go from dating to married
Mhm.
in a year or two. And the more I think about it too, I,
A
I feel
year or
like it's a
two.
matter of,
I
meaning
married
the,
my wife just shy of 9 months after I met her.
well, and I married my wife just under a year after we started dating. So, I mean, yeah, two is, I'm being generous
Okay.
with the two.
Give him a
But
little bit of leeway.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I was still in the seminary when I met my wife, so that would have been really fast, but was really fast. But
Yeah.
that's kind of beside the point. The point is, well, it's kind of beside the point, but it's also, like even
Part of
then,
the
I
story.
wish we would have met sooner. I wish we would have met a long time ago. I wish we
Yeah.
could have been married for longer. But the point is, not only does the dating portion of your life not have to be very long. That was something I tried to add. Like, hey, when the rules for dating get tough, just remember, if you keep a clear head about you, it doesn't have to be that long. But
Yeah.
there's a sense of, if we're to think with a more, if you think of your future children, think about the human race, you should actually be motivated to make sure it doesn't last very long, because you know I mean, the population, people get worried about overpopulation. It's going down, and just look at the church. And my pastor likes to talk
Mhm.
about how contraception is a big part of that, and it is. But contraception isn't just married couples contracepting, it's the cultural ethos that has separated sex from procreation that
Mhm.
um, has made us think like, well, okay, you know what? Just if you're young, date, have fun, become enmeshed and show these signs of affection, have sex before you get married as a way to judge whether you'll be happy with that person or not. Take as long as you
Mhm.
need, and you're not getting married till your late 30s or your 40s. This is not to come on down on anybody who, for good reasons, didn't get married to that long. But if you're just kind of like putting all these other things first, wasting the
Mhm.
fertile years This is in some ways, like what about the justice? What about the fact that, I mean, having your kid at 20, parenting takes energy, and, and
Hmm.
your kids need you more, like, in a way, they need you as babies, right? Like they're literally dependent on you, but they need you
Yep.
when they become adults too. So when your kid's
Yep.
20 and you're 40, that's a pretty good arrangement. But if your kid's 20 and you're 60, because, they're going to need you to help watch their kids and give you them advice and just, still kind of be there for them. I mean, this is things that people dating, let's kind of have fun, let's put it off a marriage. These are the things you got to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And the refusal, just the cultural ethos that doesn't do that, that's a denigration of marriage too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just add that on to say, like, okay, you got red pill, don't do it, don't whatever. You got, don't ever marry anybody, but sleep with as many women as possible, or be polygamous, or just kind of find someone to have companionship, but put off the idea of getting married, or at least get financially stable, so get successful in your career, and do the things you
Hmm.
want to do, date, and then get married if you want to. Of course, then of course you have these relationships that they don't work out after 8 years, 9 years. They've been sexually active. They probably moved in together, and then it's a horrible breakup.
Yep.
Where you might have been able to get to the core of all that in 3 or 4 dates with the right conversations, and saved yourself all kinds of heartache.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'm being pessimistic here, but this is not good. But
Yep.
um, again, and then, yeah, so that's the church perspective too. We complain about a lack of vocations to the priesthood and religious life. There's less people getting married in the church, so those vocations are down too. But
Yep.
I want this to be a hopeful, message today. So where do you think the answer is, or how do we begin to get at an answer?
So, like with many things in life, the answer is in intentionality. Okay. When I and I hate to use myself as an example because I'm not the ideal example for most people. I was in the seminary for a decade. But it
Not
worked
the
so
ideal example
well.
either.
Yeah. But the reason I want to use the example is that, when I was in my 20s or my early 20s, if I had been out in the world trying to date, I wouldn't have known exactly what I was looking for. But after having gone through all the, the courses of seminary and trained on, like, how to prepare a couple for marriage and canon law of marriage and divorce and all that and annulments, I had a much clearer idea of who I would be looking for. And when I left seminary, I had a few months there of discerning, to leave, to go to a different seminary, or, discern marriage. And became pretty clear was supposed to discern marriage. Once my spiritual director and I came to that conclusion, I didn't waste any time about it. I talked to and at least talked to and then dated uh, every eligible young lady in my parish within 2 months, because I was like, I'm not going to waste my time with this. Like, I have a job. I'm trying to get established. I'm already 27. Like, I'm not going to waste any more time than I have to. And I did. Most girls didn't make it past the first, conversation that was very direct and to the point about, like, hey, I'm trying to find a wife. And they could appreciate that. I mean, granted, I was at a very traditional parish there in Assumption Parish in Nashville, so a lot of them had the same intent, but it was pretty clear. Okay, not a good fit, not a good fit. Some made it to the first date, not just talking, like, okay, but none made it past the first date. And when I met my wife, it was by happenstance of being at the right place, right time. Not one of the people I was intentionally trying to, interview. Um, but our first date, if you will, was pretty much like an interview. We spent hour upon hours talking about those big questions and being very deliberate about it. Um, and in any case, again, not going to be everybody's, uh, ideal. Certainly not the cute fantasy storybook. Um, which I will make a small aside that, the irony is that our fairy tales show, you know, the princess and Prince Charming running off and, falling madly in love at first sight. And people forget that the reason that was able to happen was because their marriage was already arranged. Like you do actually have accounts of princes and princesses meeting and being madly in love with each other from first sight, partially because they already knew they were meant for each other. Like, and you have almost adorable little comments of like, these like, who is it? One of the French princesses, I think she was 9, and she would talk about her beau prince, her handsome prince, because they had been engaged since they were 9, and they lived together. There, she was brought to the court to be raised with him, um, and they did have sort of a little fairy tale experience, but it's because it was arranged. It was already planned by people who had spent a lot of time and energy preparing and desiring this for the good of the kingdom. So the expectation that we have of this fairy tale, how it's supposed to look like, there's a backstory to that. The modern day, because the majority of women are not healthy in the head, they are they're filled with feminism, you know, mental illness is out the wazoo. Your average bar or dance club, half of them are on medication. Like, so people young men need to be intentional. Just saying, okay, women are bad, this is going to lead to misery. Well, yeah, if you're looking at, a cross section of the population, sure, you know, take a cross section population just of the nubile women, a quarter of them have an OnlyFans account. And while that's sure people can repent, that's already a massive red flag, you know. So if a young man is going to be intentional, he needs to not be considering that those big sections of society. He needs to be considering where are those young women who will be meeting his criteria at. You know, go to the more conservative parishes, go to the trad parishes, go to the young adult groups. You know, meet people, talk to them. And if you go to one and you find like, I'm kind of friends with all these people, but I'm not interested, go to a different one. You know, keep going. Don't just be like, oh, well, it's too bad. There's nobody here. Guy, the young adult group at our parish, it was sad. I watched kids in there for years and years and years, kind of lamenting that they couldn't find anyone to marry. It's like, because this same handful of 30 some odd people have been stuck here in the same young adult group for the last 15 years. Not quite, but, you know, for years, and none of them were a good match for each other. It's like, why don't y'all go somewhere else? Branch out or bring new people in, you know? And when finally one or another of them figures that out and they go somewhere else and they find the person to marry, you know, it usually doesn't take that long once they meet that person. Um, so intentionality is a huge part. The next thing is to realize that um, marriage is what you make of it. There's this idea that, we have to have the same, Pisces and Virgo, the same astrological sign and all this hoopla of like the alignment of the stars. And, even amongst a lot of Catholics, like, well, this person was made for me. Really? I mean, maybe, but also the fact that you can marry and remarry implies that God maybe has made this person capable of a marriage, not necessarily designed for this one specific person. Now, of course, I believe certainly that Providence has a line where many couples are, you know, willed in Providence to marry. Of course, if they are getting married, that is in line with Providence. But this idea that you have to have this magical connection or be waiting or expecting that is silly. Most people, if they choose to be, are capable of a happy marriage with most other people because the requirements for a happy marriage are actually fairly low. Like, it's not rocket science. Be respectful, be kind, be loving, be attentive, you know, generally have the same alignment of goals, Like a thing I commonly tell young people that I'm coaching on for dating is, look for somebody who has similar goals. It's one of the reasons why I love Hallmark movies because, like, the chick who goes out to the country and meets some guy from a small town who never wants to go anywhere but the small town, and they meet and they fall in love. It's like that marriage is destined for failure because they have such a drastic disalignment of values and goals to the point that these are existential questions. This is her identity to be this lawyer boss babe in the big city. This is his identity to be a country boy. And so if he goes and joins her, he's going to resent that. He's not going to fit. He's going to have difficulty finding a job. Maybe he doesn't need a job, but he's not going to fit. She stays out there. Maybe they can live just fine off his salary out or, hourly out in the country, but she's going to feel not fully living her best life that she had planned and spent years preparing for to be a lawyer or whatever the version of the same exact Hallmark story goes. You know, but that those stories do show they show it the irony that they show the truth through their falsehood, that their falsehood being that this is cute and they fall in love and looks great, and that sort of thing does happen, but they don't show how it goes 20 years from then or even 5 years from then for that matter, when this couple is disgusted, distant from each other. They're living in different states most of the time, you know. So if a couple can, if someone can find a person who has a generally aligned set of life goals, or that at least can work together. Say one wants to be accountant, one wants to be a farmer. Cool. As long as the accountant's okay with being an accountant in a small town, sure, that can work. But if one of you is heart set on being a homesteader and the other one to work on Wall Street, like y'all gonna have a hard time connecting and making this work where both of you feel filled. So, but beyond that, once you have that basic alignment of goals, now the other thing is the alignment of values, which, you know, marrying somebody outside the faith is a fantastic recipe for disaster.
Allowed, but
Um,
to be discouraged. Yeah. And
allowed,
definitely
but there's a
risky.
reason. There's a reason the church says don't do it, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, the church is mean. It's because the church wants to make sure this person stays Catholic," as if that's ball and chains. Like, actually, it's because the church wants this person to be happy.
Right.
People forget there's that element of morality is that this is all meant to lead us to happiness, both here and forever.
Right.
Um, and so but beyond that, those alignments of values and goals. After that, everything is choice. Everything is a matter of, do you choose to live with this person? Do you choose to love this person? Do you choose to step up? The differences in personalities, though, like you have to have the right alignment of, sanguine, choleric, and all these things. You'll even see this in Catholic circles where everyone loves to use the four temperaments. It's like, that's great. That has zero bearing on whether or not you can be a good couple, you know, any more
Sometimes
than the
even
alignment of your.
mm,
Oh, go ahead.
sometimes I think even like there can be an overemphasis on like making sure you find somebody who has shared hobbies or interests or whatever. That might be worth something to a point, but honestly, when you have kids, um
Mm,
and you don't even have a ton of time for all of that, like most of your time is being spent on how do we take care of our kids and I mean, it's important to make time for those things. Don't get me wrong.
yeah.
And it's important to find someone you can have fun with, but if this person likes, I don't know, I mean, my wife likes scrapbooking, I like playing beanbags, cornhole, like great, like I mean, you're gonna have different ones too, and that's okay.
I mean, if your intent is to stay childless for a long time, then sure, having somebody who likes to cross country run with you, that might be important. But unless you're planning on being dinks, not so important. You know,
Which,
if
from a
you're
Catholic
planning,
perspective, is also not a great idea, provided there's not apart from medical issues. You know what I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about.
yes, all too well. Like, but I mean, even then, it's like, you know, Megan and I, like, I mean, this is no secret. It's on the internet that, you know, we're not able to have children naturally. Now, we've gone through all sorts of hoops and, hurdles of adoption and foster care and surgeries and medications. And, we've been trying all of the different things for 5 years now and still haven't gotten there. Not that we haven't stopped trying, we're still trying, but even that, it's like, do we technically qualify as dinks? Sure. But the difference is that we actually are trying for children. We're still investing ourselves in preparing for a child. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've prepped our guest bedroom for a child, right? Because they're like, well,
Hmm.
if you're gonna foster, you have to get it ready for the age of child you're ready to foster. So like, got the
Hmm.
whole room all set up, and then we're gonna try to prep for a different child, to adopt. Get the whole room set up, a whole different courses, like different boys versus girls, and my wife wanted to nest. And okay, well then, we've gone through that whole scenario so many times. I've gone through so many rounds of hauling children's beds up to my guest room. It's ridiculous. You know, Never to have a child in them except for my like, nieces and nephews. But there's the difference is that we've been invested in that, even though we haven't been able to have that child yet. Versus, my dink friends in what I consider the proper sense is like
Right.
they don't have children and they're very happy to not, and they are very much avoiding that and going and doing all the fun stuff, you know. And in their
Yeah.
case, I'm very glad that they have the same hobbies. Otherwise, it'd be quite difficult when they're globetrotting solo.
Right. Right. But the Catholic vision of marriage doesn't entail trying to be dinks. You might foresee being childless due to certain circumstances, but that is different than saying we're going to try to avoid it our whole marriage or whatever the case might be. That's not the Catholic vision that we're talking about
Which
here.
is another issue I see a lot of young Catholics getting into is this indefinite um NFP from the time they get married. It's like, NFP is fine. I mean, there's certainly times to use it, and it's entirely permissible. But I've run into so many young couples, especially couples I've seen in coaching, where like they enter marriage already planning on using an NFP with sort of no end date, no benchmark of like, okay, now we're well enough established to start having children.
Mhm.
Or like the classic, well, you want to avoid having a kid for the first year of marriage so you can focus on the relationship. Like, whatever idiot decided to start telling couples that, I want to smack them upside the head. That is entirely irrelevant to establishing a quality marriage. Okay. Because when we're looking at the life cycle of a relationship, their relationship is not so much important about the time, it's about that phase itself. You go from newlywed phase to the first pregnancy. That is a very key phase of life cycle. If it's only 2 months, that's fine. It's going to have very similar effects to if it were a whole year, because to be quite blunt, that phase is much less important than what happens in the last 6 months of the first pregnancy, as far as establishing the young couple and determining what their marriage is going to look like. And
Mm.
this is not just me saying it anecdotally, but this is the point that has been proved in studies that couples who establish their intimacy deliberately during the first pregnancy will have significantly higher intimacy when you're looking 2 years postpartum than those who have not been deliberate about it. And that's regardless of how long until that first pregnancy. So that sort of sweet spot of when you really have to lock in and be intentional is when you're about to have that first child who's going to take up a lot of the time and energy. But yeah, sorry. Yet another side
Wow,
tangent.
no, that was some new information, and I actually kind of appreciate that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I've shared it on the internet too, but we got married, and then our child was born 2 months later. So, I don't when I talk. I guess that's a reason I'm not inclined to like get in on a lot of the like dating conversation or whatever. Those kinds of conversations when they come up in the sphere, just because I don't feel like it's my place in some ways. Although obviously, as someone who can teach the faith now, I can say it, but I also want to, I don't know. I'm self-aware, I guess. But um,
As
wow,
one old Italian canon I know would say, uh, I don't remember what brought this up, but it was a fantastic quote. He was like, people bring up sins and they think we don't know how to deal with it. Like the church has been around for 2,000 years. He's like, illegitimate child, that's a Tuesday. Invalid marriage, that's a Thursday. And he starts like listing off all these sins,
mm,
like, man, eh. It's like, he's like, I hear confess. So this is in Florence, where this is one of the churches that's open to tourists. So he hears confessions from people around the world for up to 8 hours a day. And he's like, man, okay, you know, we have a way to fix it. There is nothing you're going to tell me in the confessional that the church hasn't already dealt with and has a solution for, and it's not the end of the world. You know, you repent of the sin, you don't repent of the child.
absolutely, and
You know,
yeah, it's probably one of the greatest example ways that God can, bring about so much goodness. Oh man.
yeah, for sure,
My daughter, I love her to death, and my wife too. Um, I mean, it's a big reason why I do this with you, and I love it, man. And so that's the thing. So I mean, it's hard not to feel bad for a lot of these guys in this situation, and I think we should be clear. You know, there's also a lot of women out there, good Catholic women, good Christian women, discouraged, wanting to find a man, and
to that
these.
point, I would argue there's more. To that point, I would say it's the women who are most discouraged because the young men are getting caught up in anger at this point. What I see, the majority of what I see in here is there's some who are depressed and sad, but the majority they sort of like they go through the phases of grief, and a lot of them are in the phase of anger. And I see a much higher degree of young women who are at the point of despair because they see the that they're not being approached. They see the same things that the secular women do, but they also see why. They do recognize that there's been an injustice to these men. And they do see that these young men are angry. And versus, a lot of the secular women who are just try to exacerbate the problem by, blaming the young men and being hateful to them for not pursuing them, not yearning for them. I saw a whole TikTok series about like, women complaining that men aren't yearning for them enough anymore. And the young Catholic girls that I've encountered and continue to encounter, I see a much higher rate of that sadness because they are trying and they don't want to pursue. They don't want to have to go out and do all the things. They want to make themselves available and be ready and willing to date and to court and to look for marriage. But there's sadly very few men are willing to pursue anymore. You know. Which, by the
I
way, for
just wanted,
anybody,
yeah.
go ahead, please.
Well, I just want to make sure to throw that caveat in there because for much of the episode, we've been talking in terms of, discouraged men, and that's real, and we want to speak to them. But I wanted to acknowledge too that, there's discouraged women out there, good women out there who really want to find somebody, and they're just not.
Absolutely. I mean, I, I think that one of the solutions today, as much as we can uh, pine for the good old days of just find somebody in your parish, that's great. That's a wonderful ideal. Um, but let's be quite blunt that most people do not grow up in their home parish. People are much more mobile than they were previously. And let's be honest that most of us who have found a parish home that truly fits us, if we're trying to be fully Catholic, we're probably having to cross parish boundaries to go to that one. You know, like the virtue of the territorial parish, and sadly died with the, I hate to say virtue of the priesthood, but of the zeal of your average diocesan priest. Not to say there are not tons and tons of fantastic diocesan priests, but there are a great many who are the, as the French would say. And especially when you have a priest who has three parishes, like he can't truly be a father to that parish, even if he is zealous, you know. So most of us have to be intentional about our parish, and with that, we have to be intentional about where we go and how do we find friends. Um, so I'll go against what quite a few of my peers and friends in the field would say amongst Catholic, relationship experts, and say that I encourage young people to go on Catholic Match or Catholic Chemistry or one of these other Catholic dating sites because everyone there is intentional. They are being intentional about trying to find somebody, you know? And, like I was on those when I was doing my intentional search. I didn't find anybody, which first time one of my brothers, he found and married his wife, and she was from Rwanda, living in England, studying for a degree in England, and they met and now married, and just they had their second child on Friday.
Oh, wow.
You know,
Congratulations. That's awesome.
yeah. So like, I mean, and he also had that mindset of he was being very intentional about looking for a wife. That's why he was on there. It wasn't to date. And that's why he didn't put a distance filter because he had that philosophy of he'd look anywhere, you know, for the right woman. And he found her and traveled across the world to go meet her and marry her. Um, and then granted, everyone has their own preferences. I kind of had the more traditional, if you will, philosophy of marry someone from your street, as the French would say, with the same cultural background. So I very deliberately looked for somebody who was from the same region that I was, and even the same like part of the state I was from. So we had that shared cultural background. Um, but everyone should look for somebody who's going to meet again those goals and values. And like with my brother, he met somebody with a vastly different culture, a different language. He had to learn French to even speak to her family and Kinyarwanda. Uh, you know, but they do have the same values. Certainly, her entire family is staunchly Catholic. They survived the persecutions of Catholics. They are very Catholic. I mean, she has martyrs in her family, and they have the same goals. And when you have the same goals and values, when you're willing to make sacrifices beyond that, you absolutely can have a fantastic marriage. You know, but that intentionality and willingness to go beyond um, your comfort zone is going to be the key for our young adult Catholics going forward.
And I mean, let's remind everybody too, like, how would you describe God's vision of marriage? I mean, this is meant to be a gift to us. So let's just remind everybody of the goal here. God did not have all of this. Well, I think he predicted the quarrel in mind, and particularly the Catechism talks about a certain tension now that exists between man and woman, and not just spouses, but men and women as a result of the fall. But what did God have in mind for all this? What's God's plan for marriage that we should have our eyes on, both the married and the dating?
I mean that what the Catechism also talks about in Scripture that this is a reflection of His divine life. You know, um, I don't know if I talked to you about this, but my therapy background is in marriage and family therapy. That's so systemic theory. So while someone who is formed in the psychoanalytical field, like most social workers and psychologists, that's the sort of intellectual lineage of Freud. They look at the ego and the id and understanding the human mind by itself and its functionality within itself, um, which has a certain virtue, but for those of us coming from the systemic theory, coming from the field of marriage family therapy, we look at not so much as the individual as functional or dysfunctional by themselves. We look at the individuals, how do they fit into that system that they find themselves in? And that system could be a husband and wife. It could be a husband, wife, and children. It could be include grandparents. There's many layers and rings to that system. But we even look at mental health as how did that disorder fit the disorder of the family? Because if the family was perfectly ordered, there would be no disorder in its members, you know, which I feel is much more in line with Catholic anthropology than the Freudian vision, which is no surprise. Freud was Jewish, not Catholic. Um, but when we, are looking at the conflict between men and women, yes, there is the conflict that comes from the fall and from original sin. But that's been exacerbated greatly by modern society. And in the vision of God, man and woman are meant to show different aspects of the relationship. Of course, God is, you know, the only difference between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is that relational element. Substantially, they are the same. They have the same attributes, and the communication of idioms, right? So but if you can say something of the Father, you can say of the Son, etc. Obviously, except for like becoming human, certain things to do with the incarnation, right? But there are things attributed to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit different from each other. And when we look at a husband and wife, while yes, we can say there's a certain equality and a certain um, natural unity, both are human, both are spouse, both are children of God. Um, they have, in a sense, that attribution of each one is meant to reflect certain attributes of the divine, you know, because if we look through the Old Testament, there are many descriptions of God with maternal language. Some of the references to mercy are actually using maternal imagery in Hebrew. While most are masculine, true, there are some that are feminine. Um, we see this in the same, even in iconography in the church, post-biblical times. Like, for example, the famous image that we oftentimes see in altarpieces of the pelican, plucking its breast to feed its children as an image of Christ. Well, it's a female pelican. Um, so male and female, yes, there is a disorder that has been introduced because of sin, but that order still finds, despite itself, excuse me, there's still a harmony. That system still exists despite the disorder. Because beyond that disorder, beyond the fall, there is that innate reflection of God in the family. And that's something that Satan can only go so far in his corruption of it. That's why his favorite thing is divorce, to render the family, because a family that is capable of resisting divorce in this modern day and age, in my opinion, must necessarily discern some of the necessary things to stay together, which involve that gift of self, involve discipline, involve humility, involve um, that reflection of Christ's sacrificial love. And Satan can't do much against that. There comes a point where if they've survived that long and foster those virtues, and the longer a couple stays together, the more they sort of are required to foster those virtues. And if they don't realize it, that there comes a point where his only option is to tear them apart. Because marriage, even natural marriage, requires many virtues to sustain itself. Because even in its most natural, non-sacramental sense, it is still a reflection of the divine relationship.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and that's what it is, right? I mean, right there in the first chapter of Genesis, let us make man and woman in our image, make them male and female, and there we go. Humanity is made in God's image, and right there you see, and when you take the two creation stories together, you see the purposes of marriage and the one flesh union. Right in chapter 1, God says, "Be fertile and multiply." Thus talking about creating this the procreative element of man and woman and their marriage. And then of course in Genesis chapter 2, it is not good for the man to be alone, and the two shall become one flesh. We see that go to the spouses and unitive
Mhm,
aspect in there as well. And then of course too,
mhm,
also with Genesis chapter 3, you see the very kind of thing that we're talking about, right? I mean, woman was meant to be the greatest gift of God to man. And it's interesting too that man had to wait around for a little while and do different things long after, for a little while after God said it is not good for the man to be alone. He named the animals. He had to spend time finding himself, getting right in his relationship with God. You mentioned earlier that not too many people can say this person was made for me. Well, in this case, in the case of the first marriage, Eve literally was made for him. And even then, it
mhm,
went through some pretty rough stuff. I mean, they brought original sin upon us all. And in that moment of immediately following their fall, when Adam, stood there and Eve ate the fruit and gave it to him, what was meant to be God's greatest gift to Eve, he said, "Oh, well, this woman who you put here with me," and he goes back to God and treats her as a burden. And then of course that's when the disorder and tension is brought between them. But also, we are living in the years of our Lord. We are followers of Christ. We're baptized, and then marriage now for us is not just a natural institution, it's a sacrament. And baptism and the sacraments, in some way, they don't do away with original sin entirely, but some of the effects are taken away. And so marriage gives us an opportunity to make our homes, in a way, a Garden of Eden, a place where we can be naked and unashamed and really know each other and
mhm,
participate in the marriage, which is Christ and his church, and somehow make that present. And love our wives as Christ loves the church, and for the wives to see us as the church sees Christ. So, God has given us the means to, in some ways, maybe if not totally, undo it all, and become, and make his vision for what marriage is supposed to be, at least to a significant degree, or in a total degree, since it now entails the redemption of a fallen world. We're able to live up to that.
yeah, mhm,
um, and I thought it was interesting too. There was a something you said earlier, and it seems a bit far afield, but you mentioned earlier that couples who come to you with issues with their sex life, if they have a good kind of relationship with each other, there's still a lot you can do there. Or it reminds me of this quote, and I posted on our social media pages, from Pope Pius XII. He said, "There are some who would allege that happiness in marriage is in direct proportion to the reciprocal enjoyment in conjugal relations. It is not so. Indeed, happiness in marriage is in direct proportion to the mutual respect of the partners, even in their intimate
mhm.
relations, not that they regard as immoral or refuse what nature offers and what the Creator has given, but because this respect and the mutual esteem which it produces is one of the strongest elements of a pure love, and for this reason, all the more tender."
I love that quote. So, I'll share with you this that I recently had a research proposal that was rejected by a faculty member at my university, um, because I had made the proposal to research the correlation between, well, let me backtrack. There is strong correlation in the current literature and current research between sexual satisfaction and relational satisfaction. Okay. Correlation does not indicate causality. Which one causes the other, to be determined? Studies do not tell us this. Um, and there's a strong correlation between what we'll call orgasmic frequency. And by that, with a woman, I'm referring to the number of orgasms on average per sexual interaction, um, not just the frequency of sex by itself. Um, between that and sexual satisfaction, and between relational satisfaction. And we can see this sort of link across these studies, but there's been no study that has linked, this orgasmic satisfaction to relational satisfaction. And being the miscreant that I am, um, and liking to study things, already having an idea that they're going to be proven wrong, um, I propose that we create a study to demonstrate that orgasmic satisfaction is has a strong, if not necessary, correlation with relational satisfaction. And my professor was like, "Well, duh, that's not the case." And I was like, "Yes, but I want to prove it's not the case because we don't have any evidence that actually proves it from the empirical standpoint." Of course, from we have comments like this from the Holy Father that this is a matter of common sense, but common sense is not that common in academia, so it is sometimes a little bit amusing to try to put studies just to disprove their favorite things. Um, but anyways, that was
Yeah.
very much inside.
Well, but this also demonstrates that the church is typically ahead of the game, even when it comes to biological and scientific realities, including with theological realities as well, obviously,
Mhm,
as the transmitter of theological truth. But the other thing this tends to correlate a lot with my pastor, Father Thomas Loya. He has this way of what he calls the magic pill for a happy marriage. He calls it deferential love. This idea that basically you speak to each other with deference, you regard the other as more important than yourself. It's not
mhm,
a an advertisement for, like, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. He doesn't deny the husband's proper role or the
mhm,
proper role of the wife, but it is this idea that you should treat the other person as more important than yourself. But I think it's wrapped up pretty well in this quote here, right? Like, if you love
mhm.
each other and respect each other and talk to each other as such, because one thing to just be able to say, like, oh, okay, yeah, I love my spouse, I respect my spouse, but does it actually come through in your actions, right? And some of my recent articles or upcoming articles on the website actually are teaching some of these things, so I look forward to their publication, but and some of the videos I'll make and stuff too, because it's a big deal, right? Like, I mean, and I think we even talked about this in some future previous live streams before, but just, oh, you always leave the dishes unwashed or whatever. Like, what? Always? Like, you don't want to say things like always and never, and you don't want to, you don't want to learn how to repair when things go wrong. And you want to make sure you get your, if you're going to make a complaint, you make it still in a way that's respectful and all of that. Um but it's just
Yeah,
crazy, like, you hear these things from Gottman and stuff too, but here you have the Pope on it really quickly. So I guess that's the other thing, right? I mean, the church, you mentioned earlier that the church wants us to be happy. And so, yes, that's why they want to guarantee that the Catholic party and a mixed faith marriage remains Catholic and raises the kids that way. But honestly, you can get so much from the church about how to have a happy marriage. And then when you put organizations like us in the mix, we have the answer for good sexual relations too, because that quote that we just gave doesn't, and that quote is kind of in the context of Pius XII. Like, he was one of the first popes to admit that you can intend pleasure in the conjugal act. It's in the catechism, but then I think he went on a whole thing to be like, but don't overdo it, basically,
yeah, yeah,
right. And his whole thing about hedonism and whatnot. And then, later on, actually, I mean, that tends to drown out some things. Pope Francis and Amoris Laetitia had a lot of amazing things to say about pleasure. Um, and some of the other literature that followed that, actually, I mean, the church is actually more positive about these things than you'll find on some spheres in the internet. But
interesting.
um, man, the church really does propose a beautiful vision of marriage. And if you stay rooted in God and in the faith, and, try to find, if you're dating, try to find a spouse who has those same values. It
Yeah,
really is a lot better than the pessimism you're seeing on the internet or from the red pill or from, I mean, hurt people too, right? So that's where a lot of this is coming from. But man, there really is hope out there.
yeah. I mean, you know what? If somebody is so convinced, like there's a young person out there who happens to watch this video and they are so convinced that there is nobody out there, you know what? Send us an email. Like, tell us where you're at, what's going on. and let's have a conversation about it. Because I have done, dating coaching with a variety of young people, and there's not many reasons why somebody isn't getting married. You know, the most common is they're not actually putting in the effort to go and interact with other people. There's that fear, maybe shame, whatever the case may be. So getting them to that boldness to go out and pursue, or just make themselves available in the case of young ladies. Um, the next most common is simply they're not desirable in themselves. Like, if you are not in a state where you could get married and sustain a family, especially for this is particularly for young men, don't be surprised if young ladies aren't interested in dating you, right? But even that,
You
like I've
can
worked with you,
work on that. Most of those things you can work on.
all of it you can work on. I've
Right. Yeah.
worked
All of
with
those
young
things.
young people about, okay, what are the steps that are going to take to get you into a place where you are ready to date, where you are ready to get married. Um, and most of them aren't that far off. It's usually a little bit closer than they may originally believe. Um, but beyond those two things, and the other one is they've seen too much media telling them that they can't find somebody. Once we take them out of the TikTok world and get them into the Catholic world, lo and behold, there are plenty of people who are looking for a spouse, who are eligible for marriage, and would make a very good spouse. You just got to get your point in the right direction. So if there's any young people watching this, or however old you are, desiring to get married, if you can't find somebody and you're convinced there's nobody for you, or you're not going to find the right person, shoot us an email. We'll see if we can help you out.
And we'll certainly be able to set a path forward for you because it'll be nothing different than what the church sets forward for you. I mean, man, if you just live the good Catholic life and see, according to the way, I mean, being Catholic is not just a religion. It's about a way. They called the followers of Christ the followers of the way. It's the way to live
Hmm.
and the way to see. And if you set on the path and do what the church would say, you're intentional, you have the conversations you need to have, you establish common values, you don't do what's proper for married people while you're not married. You keep a clear head about you, you don't get too connected too fast in the wrong ways. Man, you could be married real soon. You're not going to be with somebody who judged you based on your sexual performance. You'll see the sexual aspect of your life as something you can grow on together, which is part of what we exist for. By the way, that's what we're doing with couples. We're helping
Hmm.
them grow in this area, and they have that strong, but you'll have that strong basis of mutual love, mutual respect, good communication, the things that make a
Hmm.
marriage last. You can grow in this area, and you can live a real happy holy life in this earth, and that's going to be what will get you to heaven. And you can live this life walking the way to heaven with hope and joy and good faith.
And I would even put a caveat to that, that even if they have made that mistake and been sexually active, or moved in with their betrothed or boyfriend, girlfriend, that in and of itself does not mean that the marriage cannot be happy. We talk, especially in good Catholic circles, so much about how, cohabitation and premarital sex, set you up for failure. It's true in many ways, but it's not a guarantee. There are a great many couples out there who were sexually active before marriage. And ironically, it's like, again, I was a seminarian for a long time. I knew about a lot of the goings on of a lot of parishes. Um, it's so funny, like all like the most trad or the most conservative or the most whatever flavor you would like of active Catholics. And, lo and behold, mom, dad, grandma, somebody got pregnant with their first out of wedlock. And you know what? They still had a fantastic marriage. Again, this is not the church's first millennia. Like, you can still have a fantastic marriage. Yes, there may be some things we need to shore up, some corrections we need to make before you get to marriage, but we can address those things. The church can address those things. Um, but above all, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope that you are capable of a happy, holy, and healthy marriage.
And like I said earlier, I fit into that category of exactly what you mentioned, right? Like I said, we got married and our daughter was born 2 months later. Um, so yes, there were wrongdoings there that we repented of, but you know what? Man, I love my wife. I love my daughter. Um, I wouldn't trade them for anything. And I am very passionate about marriage, helping other marriages, doing what I do because I'm passionate about my own. And even if not all the rights, like you said, okay, sometimes all the right steps up the ladder or on the path aren't taken, but that doesn't mean everything went wrong. Things can go right. Things and and you can live in this tension where like, okay, you know what, we did the wrong thing here, but man, it turned out to be one part of the best things that's ever happened or whatever. These things can be hard to speak about,
We
but
don't
man,
derail. I mean, yes, you can derail a life. Like one act can change the whole trajectory of your life. It's true. But very often, Providence still brings about great and wonderful things in our lives, despite our stupid actions, despite our
absolutely.
sinful actions. You know,
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. God makes all things work for good for those who love him. So,
hmm
that's right. So I talk about taking all the right steps, but even if like you said, I appreciate that caveat. Even if you haven't, man, God's grace is so much bigger than all the stuff that's online, all the things that we're hearing about, and
yeah,
all the terrible stories. Man, there's so many more good ones. And
yep.
man, God is so good, and the married life lived rightly is so good. That's why we do this, because we believe that,
Mhm.
and we get to experience it. And yes, there's crosses in it, right? I mean, you talked about your the struggles of infertility, and man, that's rough. And I've shared about the struggles of losing two children to death after birth, and man, that was rough. But even in those things, that we're still able to stand here and say, this is good, this is worthwhile. And all the things you hear these people complaining about, that's not worth your time as much as trying to find this and get it right. I hope our content, our testimony is worth as much as our content for everyone listening here. And that's why I hope you consider our organization worth supporting, because real people who are reliving real marriages and giving themselves over to the faith, um, the teaching of the church, and I've been giving myself over to really reading through these magisterial documents and finding these quotes and trying to make them available, because there's a lot of wisdom in these encyclicals and various documents. I mean, the popes, they know what they're talking about. But also too, I mean, you're working on your therapy, so we're here to bring you the best of what the church has to say, the best of what science and therapy has to say, the totality of who we are and our married life and our experiences, both personally and in your case clinically. Oh man, and so far, we've been doing a lot of good work, and we're really excited about what's to come.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right, anything you want to say before we sign off here, my friend?
No, nope, we've already said a lot, so we'll save it for the next one.
All right. So our goal is to bring you at least one a month. If there's occasion, maybe more, or maybe, with someone, you can expect me and James to have one once a month. I'm not going to rule out the possibility of, either appearing with something else or obviously pre-recorded videos and all that. But please subscribe to our channel, code to the Apostolate CatholicIntimacy.org. Subscribe to our email list, become donors, subscribe to our Patreon, become a paid supporter, all of that. And we'll bring you the best of what the church and science has to offer you to make your marriage the best it can be. So thanks for joining us for another video. He's James Walther. I'm Theo McManigal. God bless you.
Bye.
Cool. That was good.